Okay, I wanted to do a video response of one that Ander posted a while ago talking about his top 25 favorite comic book characters. As anyone who knows me or engages me in conversation for any extended period of time comes to know, I'm a big fan of comic books and specifically a big fan of the superhero genre in general. And pretty much stretching back to my very early formative years. In fact, one of my earliest memories as I was reading, I began reading when I was fairly young. One of my very earliest memories is falling asleep with my reading lamp on to Amazing Spider-Man comic books. And one thing that I enjoyed in particular, if anybody recognizes this reference, you get a big thumbs up from me. I loved Peter Porker, the spectacular Spider-Ham, in the little mini comic strips that would pop up in Marvel Comics from time to time in the early '80s. Loved that character. So yeah, I mean, off and on throughout my history, I've always been a fan of comic books and superheroes, and even when I wasn't really, I'd gone through periods where, there would be times when I was reading comics, and then there would be times when I wouldn't, I'd take several years off and I wouldn't really read them anymore, and then I'd kind of get back to them into them a little bit, and so it was off and on. But even when I wasn't reading actual comic books, I was always continued to be interested in the characters. I would always kind of follow them. I would watch all the different animated television shows with superheroes, and when the superhero movies began becoming popular again in the 2000s, I was always an avid follower of those. Excuse me. And so yeah, it's just in my blood. And so I just wanted to take a quick moment to talk about some of my favorite characters, just really give you a very quick overview. This is not in like order of preference or anything like that, because I have pretty varied tastes in my supers. So this is just kind of like all alphabetically, just to kind of give you a snapshot. So let's start talking about them. So first on my list I have Animal Man, DC's Animal Man. The guy who can mimic animals, the abilities of animals. And normally he seems kind of like a cheesy character, even his name is kind of corny. But with the Grant Morrison run in the late 80s, he was turned into a very interesting character, in my opinion. They really kind of expanded upon his role as a hero, kind of what he stood for, which being kind of like animal rights and standing up for, good treatment for Mother Earth, that sort of a thing. But then, he told some very interesting stories with the character, and I've always enjoyed Animal Man. Second is Marvel's Apocalypse. I love the Apocalypse. I always have liked the character, and I'm not entirely sure why. He's one of my favorite Marvel villains, and I think just because of the fact that he represented, kind of his goal, his agenda, as it were, was basically just to weed out the weak and let the strong survive. And so he was always pitting mutants against each other so they could tear each other down, and he could kind of rise to the top with the greatest, the world's most powerful mutants, and kind of lord over the earth and that sort of thing. Plus his power was always really cool. One of my favorite superpowers in comic books. The ability to manipulate his molecular structure at will. So it was always kind of cool. And of course, if you're going to have a list of supers, you pretty much have to have Batman on there. There's not really many reasons not to have Batman. Everybody knows him, everybody loves him, everybody knows how awesome he is, so he needs no introduction. Captain America. I've always had kind of a soft spot for patriotic supers. And Captain America being one of the very earliest superheroes, the fact that he was literally around for World War II fighting Nazis and Hitler and all that kind of stuff, brings up some pretty cool mental imagery when you're thinking about the guy with the Star-Spangled Shield and all that. And there have been some really interesting stories told with the character, and I just kind of have a fondness for him. DC Comics Captain Marvel. I don't really care for the Captain Marvel of Marvel Comics, but DC's Captain Marvel has always captivated me. I think because I like him because he's kind of Superman, but he's not quite Superman, and I think his origins are very interesting. I like that he gets his power from the ancient wizard Shazam, and Shazam had bestowed upon him the powers of the ancient Greek gods, the or ancient figures of legend, the wisdom of Solomon, the strength of Hercules, the stamina of Atlas, the power of Zeus, the courage of Achilles, and of course the speed of Mercury. And he's kind of nicknamed the Big Red Cheese because he's kind of a Superman, kind of cheesy, over the top hero at times, but he's also been told in some very interesting ways. I like the fact, I like the contrast between, little Billy Batson, the unassuming, street rat, who calls upon the name of Shazam and is turned into, the mighty hero who can go toe to toe with Supes and lay the smackdown on him in a couple of amusing occasions. I also like DC's Dark Side. I'm not going to talk too much about him because he's one of those that his kind of motives are very clear. You know who Darkseid is. You know what he stands for. He's basically the big evil oppressive force. He's kind of the anti-Superman, as it were. But always liked the guy. Thought he was really cool. Just that imposing. He's kind of like DC Comics Darth Vader. Like everything he looms over is just basically overshadowed in dread and terror. And that the fact that he's one of the most powerful beings in that universe has made him kind of interesting to me. Deadpool. I love Deadpool. The mouthy merc. He's kind of, because I also, and I'll get to Spider-Man later on, because of course he's in my list of top supers. But I always admired Deadpool because one of the elements I liked about Spider-Man actually was the fact that he was so witty and quippy, and that he could be a superhero, but he could also sling insults. Well, Deadpool was the guy who was taking a licking and he was throwing insults at the same time, So again, it's just kind of the personality of the character. I always find those characters, with a little bit of sense of humor to them, that they don't take everything so seriously. I always found them interesting. Victor Von Doom, our resident Doctor Doom. Love the character. Read a very good, probably one of my favorite renditions of Doctor Doom. That was in a very short kind of like mini story arc that was running in Fantastic Four, right around I think 2001, 2002, which really brought the character alive for me. It stands as one of the prologue issue to this little story arc. It was about like a 4 or 5 issue story arc. The prologue issue stands out as one of my very favorite comic books of all time, just because of the way it's told from Victor's point of view and the progression of who he is, and then it kind of gets you inside his head to see, who he was growing up and how that affected him becoming Doctor Doom. And so always appreciated the character. Always thought he was kind of cool, and then I read that little story arc, I read that prologue, and I was totally sold on the character. I loved him, and it's lasted to this day. Dr. Fate. Again, I like the mystically oriented characters, and Dr. Fate was always pretty cool. Not a whole lot special to say about him, just that he was, in my opinion, or in kind of my view, he was always kind of like the guy who was more interesting than Doctor Strange. Marvel's Doctor Strange kind of, he was, I was never really that into him. But Dr. Fate seemed to kind of capture my interest a little bit more when it came to the Sorcerer Supreme type of superhero. I'm going to talk about these two together and actually I was engaging Andrew in a conversation about these two just a couple of days ago. But Etrigan the Demon from DC Comics and Marvel's Ghost Rider, who are kind of like very similar character concepts to me, and that's I think why I like them both so much, is the fact that they were mortals who were kind of bound to some demonic force. And that demonic force, can be effectively kind of pointed and steered in the direction to, serve the greater good. But underlying, there's kind of a story about about remorse, about torment, about basically struggle for control. That both Jason Blood, bound to the demon Etrigan, and Johnny Blaze, bound to the demon Zarathos, both can wield incredible power, but at the same time, it's not really their own. They have to fight for control of this greater entity. So it made for some very interesting stories told with those characters, and the fact that one of the things, of course, if I talk about Etrigan, I have to talk about the fact that he's always given some very, very funny, very interesting, very clever dialogue, and I always enjoyed reading Etrigan comics just for kind of his one-liners and comments alone. And Green Lantern, not any particular rendition of the Lantern, other than Guy Gardner, of course, but primarily kind of Hal Jordan and Kyle Rayner. Green Lanterns always interested me. Just the power suite, the kind of galactic police force type of a thing that the Lantern Corps represents. The Joker. If you're going to talk about supers, you talk about Batman, and if you talk about Batman, you have to talk about the Joker. He's the main man. He is one of the most fearsome, villains, fearsome yet unassuming villains out there. Unassuming in the sense that, he's not possessing of any incredible power. He can't lift mountains. He can't fire beams from his eyes, but he doesn't need to. He doesn't need any superpowers whatsoever to cause complete and utter havoc. My favorite rendition of the Joker actually being Mark Hamill's version of the Joker in the Batman animated series, more specifically when he reprised his role as the Joker in the Arkham Asylum video game that was released a couple of years ago. That was perfect. That was brilliant, and the reason is because I love his portrayal of the character. I love the voice that he brings to the character, the laugh, just kind of the intensity. And what was great about the video game was because wasn't a Saturday morning kids cartoon series, they could really cut loose with the character, and he could really go into some dark directions that he wasn't allowed to explore in the animated series. So it's the perfect merger for me. That was a dream come true to see Mark Hamill voice the Joker in that game, because he could bring the character, but he could also bring the intensity. He could bring the full-on Joker madness, and he did in that game, and I was really impressed with it. The Juggernaut. I love Juggernaut. I don't know why, and I think one of the things that makes Juggernaut interesting, in my opinion, is the fact that he was a X-Men villain, but he wasn't a mutant. He wasn't powered by mutant powers. It was a mystical gem, and I just think the character is really cool. He's pretty much a one-trick pony, but I always enjoyed him. Again, he was kind of a quippy villain. He was always willing to snap back with witty lines and stuff. And so he's captured my imagination. They did horrible things to him in the third X-Men film. Then again, that movie in general was just really bad. But Lex Luthor. I like Lex. Again, kind of like we're talking about how the Joker is basically a lowbrow, or kind of like a low-key, unassuming villain. Maybe not low-key, but you get what I'm saying. Lex Luthor, again, the guy who's just all brains. He has no physical, capabilities, whatsoever to compete with these supers. So he just plain outsmarts them. Of course, he does his super science thing too, but it's the fact that he was the man with the plan. He was the guy that had the decades-long, agendas. And you feared him for his intelligence. Martian Manhunter, John Jones. Again, no particular reason for liking the character. I think I like his power suite. The kind of the variety of the shape shifting and matter manipulation powers that he has. But I also like kind of the character. That he's basically a stranger in a strange land. He's the last living Martian. He's kind of alone. And so he's really kind of, he struggles to deal with people on a day-to-day basis, and so it gives a little deeper meaning to his search for, himself, for humanity, or whatever it is you want to call it. Nightcrawler. Not as big a fan of Nightcrawler as a friend of mine, who's a friend of mine um, is that's his very favorite, comic book character of all time. He absolutely loves him, and I like him too. I think there was something interesting about Nightcrawler because, unlike a lot of the X-Men, he was physically deformed, and so he really didn't fit into society on a day-to-day basis. And I mean, like the very first, his very first appearance in Uncanny X-Men, with him being chased by an angry mob through, the streets of Munich or whatever, with torches and pitchforks, just really speaks volumes about who the character was and the struggles that he went through. And so he's always been somebody that's had my attention. The Phantom Stranger, DC Comics Phantom Stranger, one of those kind of obscure characters that he very rarely ever has kind of his own stories or his own series. He did for a little while, but more often kind of pops up in as a character in other comic series, and usually just as kind of a forewarning. He almost never gets involved directly in what's going on, but I loved his origin story, which was in fact 3 different stories that were possible origins for the Phantom Stranger, because nobody really knew where he came from, and the question remained, it's even possible that perhaps the Stranger himself doesn't know his true origins. Was he a demon was he an angel that refused to fight for either heaven or hell, or, was he the wandering Jew? And I liked the ambiguousness of the character, but I liked the fact he was one of those rare characters, along with Deadpool, who could actually break the fourth wall, who would actually talk directly to the reader. And the fact that he was apparently possessing of incredible power, but at the same time there were apparently limits, because he wouldn't, again, just get directly involved with anything. He had to kind of play behind the scenes. And always fascinated with that character. The Question, of course, the Question being a kind of the ultimate inspiration for Rorschach of Watchmen, who is another one of my favorite Supers characters. The characters kind of go hand in hand. They're very similar kind of mentality, even though Rorschach, of course, is kind of like the ultimate, like the epitome of taking that, that mentality to its most extreme. Solomon Grundy, again, one-trick pony character, but I don't know, there was something always interesting about him, the fact that, he's kind of the big dumb brute, but at the same time, there have been some times when there were stories told with him that you could kind of empathize with the character. And of course, the Spider-Man. I cannot talk about superheroes and not talk about Spider-Man. He's always been my favorite superhero for many reasons. With great power comes great responsibility is one of those hallmark keys. Whenever I think about superheroes, whenever I think about comic books, whenever I think about that genre of entertainment, whenever I think about that mindset of what is a superhero, I come back to that quote, "With great power there must also come great responsibility." And that very much shaped the way I view supers, the way I understand supers, the way I appreciate supers, and even the way I judge supers. The eternal conversations about, what is a anti-hero, what is a hero, what is a villain, that sort of thing. What is a vigilante? And for me, it always hinges on that core concept. So, love the character, have always loved the character, probably will always love the character. And Superman. Superman's a tough one, but when I really when I think about the heart of it, of the character, I do really enjoy Superman. His writers, artists, and everything have done, some horrible things to the character over the years, almost to the point of being irredeemably stupid with that character, taking him to extremes that do not belong. Honestly, John Byrne's Man of Steel, when in the mid-'80s, when he came to kind of, DC asked him to rewrite the character's origin, to kind of like resettle the character, depower him, turn him back into, an identifiable character again. That's kind of the heart of Superman to me. And again, I guess kind of like Superman. I mean, kind of like Spider-Man. What appeals to me about Superman is his heart, the fact that he is that he is one of the most powerful superheroes in the world, in the DC universe, if you want to venture, and yet the core concept of him, when told well, he would freely, willingly give up all his power, give up his life, give up everything, if it meant saving someone. And so it's the fact that it's the heroic sacrifice, and he truly embodies the concept of the heroic sacrifice to me more than any other superhero. The Thing, Fantastic Four's Thing, Ben Grimm, love the character, and again, I think it's because he's kind of a troubled soul, but he also is kind of witty with it, and he's always groaning, and he's the counterpoint to the Human Torch. And then Venom, my favorite Spider-Man villain. Again, it's the conflict. It's the dual layers with Eddie Brock, with Venom. Eddie hates Peter, Venom hates Peter, and then the two of them bonding together to create just kind of this poison. That we are poison to Spider-Man. Always loved the character. And then finally Wolverine. Again, kind of like Superman, he's been really horribly mangled by writers at times, but at his heart, he is the man who, he's kind of the rogue with a heart of gold, and he would willingly, at least in the rendition of the character that I connect with, he would willingly sacrifice himself for his teammates, that he would make that sacrifice to protect them. And that was his role. That was what always appealed to me about him. So anyway, that's a little overview. So go ahead and give me any shout-outs. Let me know if you have any questions about any of those characters, or share with me your own favorite characters, or comments on any of the characters that I brought up. And I look forward to hearing from you guys, and I will talk to you soon.